Good morning. Thank you all for joining. So this is our webinar for our groups that use Navigator to file ACA reporting. We will record this. We will in the next few days publish the recording of this and the slide deck. So you'll get all of that. If you're registered, if you're here, obviously, we'll send you an email, plus we will post those links on our website. This year, we designed the webinars as a series. So Tuesday early in the week, I held an ACA 101 webinar, which covers the basics of reporting. And our website, we already have the link to the recording, the slides, plus we pulled out and created a 2-page document specific to coding. So that's a good cheat sheet to download. But this webinar will focus again on Navigator. There's no fundamental changes from last year. The IRS forms are the same. Navigator functionality is the same. So for our experienced ACA folks, both webinars will act as a refresher. But new to ACA reporting, we know it can be overwhelming. There's lots we're going to throw at you today. We've all been there. So just watch those webinars again, and then come to us if you have any questions. So if you do want to submit questions throughout the webinar, we can certainly take those. I'd ask you to limit it to general questions, and you'd use that Q&A feature. However, if you have more company-specific questions, then best to reach out to me separately, and we'll include my contact information at the end. All right, jump in. What's our agenda today? So we wanted to cover who files what are those deadlines, what are the penalties, and then really we'll spend most of our time on those second 2 bullets, going through Navigator, and then that NELCO to transmit our forms. Okay, you'll notice I'm going to go through rather quickly. I have almost 75 slides, not to scare you off, but I want to get all this information out there. So again, once the slides are posted, it may be helpful to have those handy because I'm going to try and get through this quickly. All right, who files what? So we'll start in that blue box on top there. We're starting with that term, applicable large employer. Most of you have probably heard that. It's one of those IRS terms they came out with about 10 years ago. So they're defining that if you have, on average, 50 or more full-time employees in the preceding calendar year. So regardless of your plan year, they're looking at calendar year for everybody. So look at payable hours of all your full-time equivalent. So that also includes your part-time folks. All of that is considered in that ALE status. And we do have a calculator tool on our website, and we'll link to that at the end of the slide deck here. So that's determined if you're an ALE, but then that last sentence there, so companies with multiple business units, so our controlled groups, aggregated groups, if you belong to any of that, then really you need to count all of your employees together to determine if, as a group, you are ALE status. If you are, then each separate entity that has their own EIN needs to file separately, because these are a form of tax forms. So the ACA information, like your company name, FEIN, needs to match what's on your W-2. Okay, so that helps us know who has the requirements here, who's an ALE. Now this bottom chart, this is a useful one here. Who is required to file, and what do you have to file? So I'm actually start at our bottom here. My laser pointer functions, fun. So if they get you too dizzy, you can let me know, but see if I can handle this one. All right, so at the bottom, insurance provider, so carrier. We'll start on the left here, fully insured plans. So for our fully insured plans, the carrier will provide what's called these B series forms. But if you are a large employer, we've discussed an ALE, then you also need to file a set of forms. So this is where most of our folks are going to fall. Fully insured ALE. So that means there's going to be 2 sets of reporting happening. So your employees are going to get 2 sets of forms, to the IRS are going to get 2 sets of reporting. So you have to do your own set, and the carrier does a set. Now, if you're fully insured and you're not an ALE, then you don't need to file. You don't need to be on this webinar. So hopefully you're not here. You're certainly welcome to join us, stay, but no filing requirement if you're fully insured and not an ALE. Okay, we go back down to our bottom row for the carrier. For our self-funded, self-insured plan, there's different ways to call that there, but the carrier does not do any reporting. So that's big to know, because we know we have a few of you that have moved over to self-funded during the year. So that means any part of the year where you have people on a self-funded plan, then the carrier is not going to do any reporting. So you're still going to do, if you're an ALE, you're still going to use the same exact forms you were if you were fully insured versus self-funded. There's just an extra part on this 95C that has to be populated. And that's really listing out all of the covered individuals on the forms. Okay, so we're still on this self-funded. If you are a small employer, so not an ALE, again, the carrier is not going to do anything, so you need to file those B series forms. I'm throwing out lots of letters and numbers. B series is somewhat of a simpler version to the C series, so a little bit easier than having to do what those ALE folks have to do. So for non-ALE, you're not required to offer coverage, but if you do, if you have any covered individuals, then that needs to be reported. Okay, that's who files what. When do you have to file? The next question. These two rows at the top here are talking about forms to your individuals, which are mostly your employees. So that's the 1095 form. This top row, we want to focus that March 3rd. So most of your folks will, most of you get all the filing done, usually sometime in February, ideally in January. So you want to get all of those forms out to those employees by March 3rd. Now, the IRS does allow electronic distribution if your system can handle that. NELCO, though, will actually mail the forms out to all the individuals. We'll get to that later. We have the next row here for state filings. There's a handful of states that require filing. And that's really for that individual mandate. So they want those by January 31st out to the employees. California is one of those states, but you'll see on their website, they'll tell you there's really no penalty if you don't meet this deadline. So you can look at that March 3rd deadline. And again, the state filing is only for fully insured. So we'll mention that throughout here, but for state filing, that's only for, I guess it's the backwards. So fully insured does not need to do state filing. Let me reiterate that. So fully insured, the reporting from the carrier will be sufficient. So you only have to do state filing for self-funded. Okay. So that's getting the forms individuals. Down here is filing. So filing means you're going to give the IRS copies of all of those individual forms, plus what they call kind of their cover sheet, the 1094, and that's due by end of March. Now we need to file that electronically, which is why you're here, because they do have a new rule now that you can only file paper if you have less than 10 forms. But you're here using the system, so we're going to file electronically, which is great. So in this page, I'm going to focus on March 3rd to individuals, and then March 31st to IRS. Okay. Penalties. All right, I don't want to scare you too much with this. Obviously, you understand the importance. That's why you're taking the time to be here today, but it's good to note this because they do change these rates somewhat each year. These first two are talking about coverage. So this is for my ALE groups. If you do not offer the coverage to enough of your employees, then there will be this monthly penalty, but it's only imposed if any one of your employees went out to the marketplace and got subsidized coverage, like through Covered California. And if one employee did that and you didn't offer coverage to enough people, then they're going to charge you this $247.50 per month times all your full-time employees. That can certainly be a hefty fine. This next one is more only charged per individual that goes to marketplace. And one little bit of reprieve here that if you have the first penalty, IRS won't charge the second normally. So something slight there. These bottom two are talking about getting the correct forms to the individuals and to the IRS. Now, these are obviously much less here, but it's per individual failure, so per form, but they usually do charge double. If they're going to do one, they're going to do the other. And then California does have their own penalty if you don't actually file. You need to for those self-funded groups. Okay, those are the penalties. So now we can jump into our, we call pre-reporting steps. Jump ahead here. So really, this is the data that you should have maintained your system throughout the year, but it's a good time to check before you jump into ACA. Our next page will show you, but we recommend running an ad hoc report to look at that data. So you're going to look at things like hire and term dates, the classifications like full-time, part-time, make sure you have the pay information updated, address, benefits enrollment, all that good stuff. So if you do an ad hoc reports, so you go under reports and then recommend a column-based report, and then you can pick which fields you want and then run that and look at your data. Okay, manage hours. So hours are used to determine if variable hour employees had enough payable hours to be eligible for benefits. Like, did they average 130 hours during the measurement period? So payable hours are hours worked, vacation, all of those. As we mentioned before, when you're determining if you are an ALE, they're looking at full-time and part-time. That's to determine if you have to offer the coverage. So if you are an ALE, then you only have to actually offer the coverage to the full-time. So that nuance can get a little tricky there. Really, these hours should be populated throughout the year because that can determine who's getting coverage throughout the year, but you definitely want to make sure this is cleaned up in January. Reminder that the hours are not transmitted if you have that payroll integration coming in. They're not coming in through that. So you do need to come into Navigator and populate this for any employee you have classified as variable. If you can, also populate it for anyone you have classified as ineligible, if you have that data. Now, if you only have a few employees to populate, you can manually enter that over here on the ACA menu, the Manage Employees. But for most of us, you want to import that in this Manage Hours. So we're going to click on Import Hours. Okay, that takes us to a screen for Import Hours. A couple things here. So step one, you're going to download the template. We'll show you an example of that, and then you'll come back here and then actually import. So let's click on one of these. I'll show you an example of both here. So two different templates, very similar. It's just if you're going to do daily hours or monthly. This import is rather particular, so you just don't want to change too much here. Leave this header row as is. Don't add any spaces there. The sheet name will say output at the bottom, so you just want to leave that, but just populate all of your data. Then after you import, then you want to check and make sure that you didn't have anybody that failed. If you did, then you can do a re-import, and it'll just override what you did before. It's not going to add to it. Okay, very important step here is to clear out any HR pending actions. Ideally, you're doing this throughout the year, but certainly you want to double check this come January. So we're back over here on ACA Console menu. We're going to pick our first item, Eligibility Dashboard. I'm going to see that takes us to the New Hire Periods tab. Note you do have a second tab here, but we're going to start on our New Hire Periods. Okay, so we're going to click on HR Pending Action. This lists all the employees that completed their measurement period, but the eligibility status has not been finalized by you, the admin user. So you want to go through each employee and finalize their eligibility status. Okay, so to do that on their row, you'll see these little blue dots here, and that pops up the menu. If you see anybody marked ineligible, but you know they had more hours, you don't see all 12 months populated, then you can go back and do the add hours and then go through those steps again. But for others, you can go ahead and finalize their status. All right, now that you've confirmed that all the hours are populated and the right people are marked as eligible, let's move on to this step. So remember, maybe a couple years ago, they moved this feature. So this previously ALE calculator. Now we're going to go into reports, audit reports, and ALE count. This page shows you totals per month, the data used is for, and then all of the data used for the calculation. You can see all the information here. And then this bottom row are the results. So you're looking to see if on average you had over 50 each month. You can see here in this example, this client had a few months there under 50, but really they average over 50 for the year. So they are an ALE. If this was somewhat reversed, if you had 9 months of under 50 and then only 3 over, then there is a possible exception if that was due to seasonal employees. Next, we recommend using this affordability calculator tool. So it's very useful to predict if you'll have errors on the forms, but it only checks rate of pay safe harbor, not federal poverty limit nor W-2 safe harbor. From our ACA console, I'm going to go all the way down here to affordability calculator. This top field is our low cost plan field. You can see it's a drop down. You can certainly click there and make sure you have the right one. It should already be populated, but if you do make a change, make sure you click refresh so the rest of the page knows which plan to look for. Your data may be perfectly clean, but for some of us that have a couple issues, you'll see a hyperlink, so you can click on that blue hyperlink. That will display a list of those employees for you to diagnose what's causing the issue. You can see here the list includes the employee's pay information, because often the issue is outdated pay information. Once you update that, then it usually clears out these affordability issues. Next, you'll want to check on the ACA plan assignments. This should already be populated, but it's good for you to review and verify the settings before running ACA reports. This will affect how Navigator populates your forms. So all these are certainly important. I want to touch on a couple. That first column there for self-funded. Again, that will affect which forms to use and which parts of the forms. That's very important. And then you can see we have our low cost plan here checked. So you want to make sure all these are checked appropriately. Again, should already be populated, but you want to double check here and make sure you have the right low cost plan populated. Okay. Now the last item on our ACA setup menu, assign safe harbors. Technically, this is not a required section Navigator, but most of us do need to use a safe harbor. If so, you probably already have this populated, but we cover safe harbors a lot more in that 101 webinar, but you may already be familiar with all of that. So normally, a group uses the same safe harbor all year for each employee. However, you can make changes each year, and you can set different rules for different classes. This example, you can see we're using rate of pay for everyone. If you do want to make a change, then you actually want to delete this and then add in the right safe harbor, because Navigator is not necessarily looking at this created on date. So make sure you have just one safe harbor per your class of employees. Okay. Now let's jump into setup for actual ACA forms. All the reporting is done on 2 types of forms. You can see the menu here, 1094 and 1095. The 1095, as we mentioned, is the one that goes out to each covered individual, and then 1094 is more employer data like a cover sheet. So from this menu, we're going to click on the first one, which is Part 1, Employer Information. Normally this information doesn't change, but you'll want to review and update as needed. Okay, I'm going to touch on a few things here. So at the top here, you see are using business units to file multiple EINs. So these are for the group's part of a controlled group, aggregate group. So if you have multiple EINs, then you want to check that, and then that'll change how you populate this data. It'll just be on a separate page. Where if you're not using that, then it'll just stay on this one individual page. So if you have multiple EINs, you'll check that. And then it's asking, as part of that group, are you together part of an ALE? Okay, but for most of us, not part of a controlled group, then it's asking, are you a large employer? And so then you would check that box there. Because again, we do have some of our smaller groups that are self-funded also doing reporting. But if you're an ALE, you want to check that box. And just going down the form here, it's asking for primary contact. That'll be listed here if you've done this before. If you want to verify and update that. There's a few other optional settings. Like if you can, say you have the qualified offer method, and that's if you've offered that to at least one full-time employee for the whole year, then we touch on that in 101. And we touch on this 98% there, 101. So then if you're using the qualified offer method, they're asking if you want to put code 2C in line 16. A lot of numbers I just threw at you there. So if you do have that qualifying offer method, then you can just populate line 14, which is the 1A, which Navigator will do that for you. And then you could leave the next two blank. However, it's asking if you want to populate 2C in line 16. That just means that for anyone who actually took coverage and you're populating that field, it is nice to have that there so you can see the complete data, but not required. So but if you are checking the first box, I do also recommend the second one. Third box is for our union groups. So if you do have union employees and you are contributing to their fund, you can check this box. But you'll need to make sure that the employees individually have all their information checked. And they should already have that from earlier in the year. The employees marked as collectively bargained. They're in an ACA classification that's eligible, and a benefit class, a non-benefit eligible class. Okay, it's a lot. This last one, just asking if you want to use mailing address. If you collect those for employees, you might as well check that in case you have any. Okay, costs from NELCO. So Navigator, the benefit admin system, we offer to you at no cost. However, to actually distribute and do the filing, then there's this third-party NELCO, which does charge fee. So that's what we have here. There's a lot on this page. You can see they've really doubled the form, the rows there, because they're talking about peak pricing and state filing. But again, state filing is just for our self-funded groups. So fully insured, ignore the state filing. Make sure you don't pay for that. Most of our clients choose a bundle, which means you're doing the distribution to the group, the employees, all the individuals, and to the IRS at the same time. And it's a little bit cheaper if you do that. So that's this bundle down here. So I'm going to point out peak pricing. NELCO does charge an extra $1 per form if you submit on one of these dates. So another plug to try and get that done early. All right, now let's get into how you audit and file with Navigator. This is where we'll spend the rest of our time together. Okay, so the system has 4 steps. We're going to spend most of our time in step 2 and 3 on audit and actually preview the forms. We'll get into that. The 4 steps. So over on our menu, the 1094, 1095 reporting, we have audit and e-file. It gets us here. And then so we're going to click on step 1. That gets us to ACA plan assignments. Again, this information you've already had entered, but you can just look at that and you do have the hyperlink if you need to make any edits. And then we're still on step one. You're going to scroll down the page. This shows the employer information you entered. So this will be populated on that 1094 report. So just check that, make edits if you need to. Okay, so now step two. So we can audit for any errors in the employee demographic. So Employee Navigator is really good about warning you if there's any issues. And so you can correct those first. There's actually some hard errors that it won't let you proceed unless they're corrected. So click on step two. This pulls information that's been entered throughout the year, like I mentioned. So if you have any errors, you can see those in the red font there. You click on each one to review the data. So the priority is to clear out any errors or code in red. This main areas where you can see the errors, and most of them fall in a couple different classifications. So this one, ACA data. So that's like your ACA classification, that full-time, part-time, or eligibility classification. And then down are just our general HR demographic data. If you have any of that missing or invalid, then that's going to pop up as an error. So when you click on, say, that first hyperlink for missing ACA data, then you'll get it when it looks like this. You want to populate that as you need to, and then click go back. When you go back to that main page, once you've cleared the errors, then you'll notice that it changes the header to employees with entered ACA data, and then it'll be blue instead of red. So you want to get rid of all the red. So then from there, you can click on the blue hyperlink to take you to the page to see just a count, like how many full-time, part-time. But then back from that page, you're going to click, you have another error. Like for us, we had missing demographic data, and then it'll take you here, repeat that step, just populate this, and then go back. Okay, now it's finally time to preview the forms we've all been waiting for, which is where we'll spend the rest of our time. So we are on step 3. Click that. This is our generate forms page. So first, make sure we're on the right year. So we're looking at 2024 tax year. So click that. And then we're going to click create preview of form data. We have it in this different dark green color, so you can tell it's an important one there. So depending on the traffic on the Navigator site, this can take a little bit to actually process. Time for us to take a deep breath, get another cup of coffee. Okay, so now we get to our generate our forms. But at this point, most of us might still have some issues. Don't be alarmed. And you can see that here with the orange box. And we'll get into that. So we'll definitely need to fix those. But first, let's jump over to our verifier 1094s. That takes us to this page. The top part is the information you've already entered previously. You just want to check all of this again. Now on to the most critical area. So we've covered this quite a bit in 101, so another plug there, but definitely we'll touch on this here. We're still on our 1094, which is more of our cover report. And this top row, it's saying minimum essential coverage offered. So we mentioned that whole 95%. So if the system thinks that you didn't offer coverage to enough of your employees, it's going to mark that as a no. This is our big red flag, because this is the IRS mandate for our ALE groups. So if any month is marked no, and if any one of your employees got that subsidized coverage out in the marketplace, then it's a guarantee that the IRS will come to you with a penalty. So we don't want that. So it's crucial that you have this row correct. And no for any month is definitely a red flag. After you review everything, I do recommend coming back here and double checking this, because we're going to make some corrections throughout, and then hopefully that'll clear all this. So the calculation is based on the count that you offered coverage compared to your number of full-time here. So if any month is no, we take action. So for now, this example, let's click on the no in January. This takes you to a list of all the employees in the calculations. I'll pause there. It's a good time to remind you that you own your reporting. You own your own ACA reporting. Navigator is a tool for you. That's why they give you several options throughout to override the data manually. I recommend you limit your use of the override option. Navigator is a robust system with all the ACA rules built in. So if your HR benefits data throughout the year is accurate, then this reporting should mostly be clean. So with that, I'd much rather you pause and take the time to diagnose the issue, to figure out why the data feeding here is not accurate. But there were several times for you to do override, and we will touch on those. So this list includes the employees that are being used in the calculation, the employees marked as no in that minimum essential coverage column are sorted and listed at the top there. That means the system thinks they were not offered coverage. And then over here, it tells you if the system thinks they were an FTE, meaning they should have been offered coverage. So these are the groups that need to be reviewed. If there is an error, it usually falls in one of two categories. If you mentioned an HR data error, coverage didn't get captured for some reason, or truly a coding exception. Navigator is a great system, but no system can capture every company's nuances. And a reminder that coverage needs to be in place for the entire month. Therefore, if you start or end coverage mid-month, then ACA reporting will not count that month as covered. So technically, you have the option to override the system. So if you click the include button, that will mark the employee as being given an offer of coverage. Of course, I do recommend that you check the data first. A good place to do that is review their 1095, which we will get into in step 3. Okay. So we're going to click on step 3 to get back to this menu. Now we'll start reviewing the actual 1095 forms. So we're going to focus on 2 areas on this slide, and I'll come back to it. We're going to start with step 1 here. Override 1095 forms. This tool allows you to create forms for employees the system did not. So you can click on that blue button. That takes us to a list of employees the system is not creating a form for. There could be various reasons, such as system thinks they were not eligible, or maybe they're a variable hour employee still in their measurement period. Again, ideally go research, but certainly have the option just to click generate form for that person. But make sure then you also click at the bottom, save form override. I'm going to go back a slide. So now I mentioned we have 2 steps here. Next, we need to check for people the system flagged in our orange box. Go forward 2 slides. That takes us to this list where the system marked employees with unaffordable coverage or non-qualifying offer. Mouthful on that one. This should list all the employees that were causing the no on that 1094 form. I mean, the system thinks they were not offered minimum essential coverage. Often, the reason employees in the list is due to something misconfigured, ACA set, employee's profile. Most common reason is not having a safe harbor in place. So for each employee listed, hopefully it's a small group here, you can click view next to their name to see their 1095 form. Now we're in their actual form. So Navigator, you can see, sticks with their orange for error, those boxes there. In this example, this person is flagged because their line 16 is blank. So if you have up in line 14 a 1E, which means that you offered coverage then the next two, 15 and 16, always need to be populated. For 16, it's either saying that they took coverage, or if they waived, then you need to put in the safe harbor. So really the red flag is we have 1E, the rest needs to be populated. So to diagnose this, common issues coded in the wrong place, such as their code is part-time, they really should be variable, or coverage didn't get captured throughout the month, or the coverage started stopped mid-month, the safe harbor not set up. So you can come back to the 1095 after you diagnosed that data, fixed it, you can come back here and then recreate their 1095 form. And then back on the other screen, you'll verify that that orange box is gone here, and then repeat that for every orange warning. If after researching you can't find the issue, you know that they were enrolled, Navigator certainly does give you the option to manually populate the codes, which we'll cover that some more. These next two slides show you more of the data on that 1095 screen. Okay, so after handling each employee, then return back to this generate 1095 step. That should have removed the orange box, or at least reduced that count there. And then, so when you're doing this on your own, this is a good time to pop back into that 1094 to make sure you have that minimum essential coverage checked for all the months. Now we can move on to view 1095s. And now we have a list of all the employees getting a 1095 form. This shows coverage per month. So to view an individual form, you can click on the green view. When you view an individual form, you may get this pop-up for the state requirement. Certainly if you have residence in California, which most of you do, a reminder that's only needed if you're self-funded. So the reporting is technically required. Navigator's not wrong here, but what the carrier does is sufficient for a fully insured plan. If you scroll down that page, you can see the 1095C codes used on the form. If there's any issues, then Navigator will show that with the orange boxes like we saw earlier. Again, this is where you could pause to try and figure out the issue that's being into here. Of course, you do have the option to manually override. Do that for each row. We do have, I mentioned that we did create that 2-pager that we have on our website that talks about the codes, and then certainly in the webinar. But there is a legend here. It looks like this one, which is great to have easily on the page. What we have in our other information on our site, though, talks to the combinations. Like if you have a code in line 14, then what goes in 16. So I do recommend that. Okay, back to this example. So this is saying in line 14, 1H, which means we did not offer coverage. And then it's saying 2C, the employee took coverage. So that doesn't make sense. Those can't go together. That's why they're flagged. So ideally, again, you fix this, but you certainly can change it here. So if you know the person did take coverage, then you could change this code as appropriate. Navigator also allows you to override that line 15 if you need to. Again, that should automatically populate if everything is correct. There is an import tool, or you can do that for each field. If you do make a manual entry, then Navigator will put that in the blue shading. So heads up, you can see what that is. And then once you're done with each person, then just click next and recommend you view each form. Okay, before we move on to transmitting data, one last time to make sure we have the clean information, because that's what it's pulling. So all those employment dates, medical plan enrollment dates, your class, like full-time variable, all of that, employee's address, their mailing address, their email, all of that. So you want to make sure you got clean data there. And if you make any changes, then you want to regenerate those forms. That was the hard part. We did it. Okay. So now we can move on to actually transmitting our data, which we do through Nelco. So once you're finished your audit, you can click next. Now we're back on this screen. So I recommend you click on this manage e-file account so you can verify users you already have set up. If you're new, you can set up all your users there. So you want to do that to create that profile. So once you do that, we can move into step 4. Hopefully your data is clean by now, but my example here, if you have any errors, then we need to fix that. So this says employee missing low cost premium. We do have one error, so let's click on that. That takes us to this landing page with a brief explanation of what Navigator thinks is wrong. So you can click on the view next to the employee. That takes you to their form. You can see here one of the fields is blank. So same as before, try and figure out what's causing that or use the override. And then once it's populated, that should clear out the error that was preventing you from transmitting. Right, all the errors are now clear. Then you get this option that we'll click on, transmit the data. We do have this option here that if you want to send the forms electronically to employees, again, Navigator will mail hard copies, but it's nice for some people to also have the electronic form. So if you click here, that's just going to tell Navigator to send Nelco email addresses that you have in your Navigator system. So you can do that and then click next. So then they'll give you this message saying that your transmission was successful. That means Nelco now has the data. So we haven't actually filed, it's just now sitting over there with Nelco. So next we'll go to Nelco's site. You do that by click enter e-file sites. So now we're on Nelco's site. This is where the actual transmission happens. So again, another reminder on the state filing because it'll pop up again here. So you only need to do that if you are self-funded, because it will populate to state filing. Most of our clients like to use this bundle here. There is an a la carte option, like if you want to send the forms to employees first and later come back and do federal filing, but it certainly is simpler and there's a little bit of a cost break if you do the bundle here. So pick the appropriate bundle. Again, if you're fully insured, you click the one that's only for federal. And then next. So we have 2 steps here. So for our federal forms, that takes us to the 1094 page. Reminder, this is only company level data that should have already been entered. So one last check. You can click next. There'll be a next again. And then we'll go to our next step here. This is the email addresses. So if you chose to send that over to Nelco, this will be populated. You can look at them here if you want. You can make edits here. If you do make edits here, though, that no, this is only the Nelco site. So then you'd want to separately go back and fix Navigator for later. And click next. Now we've come to the submit screen. So we have our 3 steps here. The first one is review the cart. You can see a couple options here, preview forms, detail report. I recommend preview forms. You can do one last check, maybe spot check a few, maybe yourself, executives, anyone you know with unique circumstances, maybe those that you manually entered. If you find issues, you can fix those. Like you can remove that, your whole payer from here, and then go back to Navigator and then send it over again. There's an option for detail report. I don't think you need to do that at this step because you've gone through so many other steps, but that certainly is an option there. We're going to click next. That takes us to step 2, payment details. So you can Just like any other website you're buying stuff on, you can either enter your card, or if you've done this before, then you have the information there. You can verify. Takes you to a payment screen, populate that, click next. Okay, now code describes this step as point of no return. They will have a message on the top of your screen. It says important. Once you submit your forms, we cannot stop the filing or printing. It's like dropping your forms in the mailbox. So this is it. So after this point, the only way you can make edits is by doing corrections. So once you're ready, we can just click pay and submit. And we did it. So this takes us to step 3, complete. Verify you get this congratulations message. The bottom left here, it lists out all the steps that Nelco is going to do based on what you purchased. So technically you're done. But I do have a couple last housekeeping steps to recommend. I want you to download and save all of the reports, all of the forms. There's a couple ways to do that. I recommend using this option, the bottom right, return to your filing home. That gets us here. On the right, click form filing history. So now we're at the page form filing history. If you've used Navigator Nelco previously, your prior years will show up here, but they only keep 3 years back. That's why it's so important for you to download and save it locally. You have a few options here. See the legend. Our first one is the clock. That's just looking at the status where Nelco is with it. They will also send you an email as they complete each step. This print icon, which we'll get to, and then the envelope here. That's if you want to individually push out an email. Nelco's already done all the emails that you already had in there, but maybe you need to correct an email, push one out again, add an email, you can do that there. There will also be an option in this top right for correcting forms. So if you need to make a correction, hopefully we don't have that, but that's certainly an option. But for us at this point, we're going to click on that print icon. That takes us to this print page. By default, all employees will be checked. Do we want? Click next. This page gives you the option of which type of data to download. Go ahead and just check all the boxes. And then download and save it locally, somewhere where your team can easily access it. So be careful not to put like a password on there. We've seen that before, and then someone comes in next year and they don't know the password. So make sure it can be easily accessible by your team. I mentioned emails. So Nelco will send a confirmation email to the email address you have set up in Navigator with your confirmation number, plus an email as they complete each step of the process. I recommend saving those emails. Next in the process, not for everybody, but possibly for some of you, the IRS might have an error code. So the IRS will validate the names and social security numbers that you submit in your filing to their database. So it's common that there can be a few mismatches. So you might get this email that says TIN validation error. So don't worry, your transmission is still accepted, still valid. It just means the government computers noted a mismatch. And they're telling you there's a potential issue. So not an official IRS notice of a problem. But you should research which employees caused the issue, then go back to your HR data and make sure there are no changes that should have been recorded. Maybe somebody got married or changed the name. Often I see it on new hires. So a good place I would normally start is look at the information you collected on their I-9, ask for a copy of their social security card. So there is an option in Nelco's site which provides you an Excel report that tells you which employees are causing the error. And Nelco walk you through the system, through that whole correction process, and they have a training that can help with that, which we'll link to in a moment. Okay, so this page, we have a couple pages here with links to resources. This first one I mentioned on our site, we have a tool to help you determine if you are an ALE. This is the link out directly to the IRS site. This is to that California Franchise Tax Board. Okay, so in addition to these webinars, the system providers, Navigator and Nailco, also have useful trainings. These first couple links are to videos. They're only about 9 minutes, which is pretty nice. They are a few years old, but the data is still relevant. I mentioned they have one specific to corrections. But we also have this more detailed 4-part webinar series. So this link will take you to Navigator's training sites with an actual demo in their system. This is your first time on that training site. They will have you create a login. But once in there, that takes you to a page with 4 recorded webinars, each about 45 minutes. So these are great for those new to the process or anyone that just wants a deeper dive. Okay, we did it. Thank you for sticking with me today. Reminder that the links to the recording and the slide deck for this webinar and the ACA 101 will be emailed out to all of you, plus available on our website. So at this point, I think we've got 5 minutes left, but happy to answer any general questions. You can submit that in the Q&A. However, if you do have company-specific questions, I'd rather you reach out to me separately. We have my contact information here. This compliance mailbox, I'm really the main person that handles that. So you have me as your main point of contact, but I have backup if I'm not here. So the email is a great place because then I can research your information and then get back to you with an answer. Okay, Sarah, how are we looking? Do we have any questions?
We do have a couple.
Okay.
One I'm going to just address right now. Somebody asked if we can send the quick video links into the chat during this webinar. So I'm going to do that while you're answering the question. So
thank you.
If anybody wants to see those simultaneously, those links will be there. Okay, the first question we have is regarding safe harbors. So the question is, if the assignment log for safe harbors shows 2 past assignments and it's the type we want to continue with, do we need to take steps again to assign it?
So no, if your safe harbor is already in there, then you don't need to change that. So safe harbor is usually one you're going to look at the beginning of the year when you're setting your rates. So let's say your calendar year, you're probably looking at this in October for next year, and you're deciding how you want to set your safe harbor rates. But then you can, at the end of the year, come review, and you can change that. Like maybe you had rate of pay in mind at the beginning of the year, but you want to do a different one at the end of the year. So then it's just a good time to double check if that makes sense. And again, you can use the same one for everybody or for different classes. So you don't need to change that if it's still correct. If I didn't answer that fully, then maybe send me a screenshot of what you're looking at, and then I can help you with that one.
Perfect. And we did capture the name of that question, so I'll make sure you know who that is. Okay, next one, just some clarification on filing deadlines. They noted that we are a large ALE company with an insurance provider in California. Do we need to focus on the January 31st deadline or the March 31st deadline?
So again, that depends on your plan. So if you are fully insured, the reporting the carrier does will satisfy all that. So I didn't mention too much in here, but for the state filing, they're not looking at the employer mandate. They are looking at the individual mandate. So any US resident, California resident is required to have coverage. So that's why the state wants the information just to know who was covered. And that is done with those B series forms. Can be done with that. So if you're fully insured, carrier will do that. If you are self-funded, then California wants their own. So the technical answer is California's deadline would be January 31st, but they do not charge a penalty. So some groups choose just to follow that March 3rd deadline. That might not be the straight answer you want, but I'm gonna give you all that information.
That sounds great. We just had one final one come in. Let me just read it. It says, I'm catching up on submitting the monthly hours and making some corrections. And I noticed the new submittals are not overriding the previous submissions. Is there a way to ensure the correct numbers are updated on the main spread?
Yeah, Sarah, let me want to capture who that is.
Okay.
And then I'll probably actually bring in my tech team we have here locally to help us with that HR information.
You got it. All right, one more. How do we know if we are fully insured or self-funded? I'm not sure
Oh,
which we are because this is our first year as an ACA or an ALE.
okay. So Sarah, that'll be one I need to follow up and look at their group. We'll
Okay.
check with your account manager to see how your plan is set up.
All right, I got it. So if you guys were the ones to answer those questions, just know that I'll get that information over to Kristen and she'll follow up with you separately.
Great.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah. Thank you all.
All right,
See you
thanks.
next time.